Welcome to Directora, the podcast where we celebrate the contributions of female filmmakers and women behind the scenes in film history. I'm Stephanie Weber, a writer, comedian, and film nerd who is happy to geek out about movie history. Last week, we talked about the very first female filmmaker, but she was French. She was making movies in France. And I hear you screaming, what about Hollyweird? No need to scream. I hear you loud and clear. Let's really kick off the legacy of women behind the scenes by talking about one of the most prolific and important women in film history, the first female director in Hollywood, Lois Weber. No relation. Not only was Lois Weber a pioneer, but she also developed new filmmaking techniques, and she met the ire of early Hollywood censors. We love a story about pissing off Hollywood censors, don't we? She was so celebrated at the time that even the one and only Cecil B. DeMille insisted that she was his favorite director. That's high praise for someone left out of most film history classes. So, Mr. DeMille, let's give Lois Weber her close-up. Before Lois Weber became one of the most respected power players in early Hollywood, she was a little girl in Allegheny, PA. Born in 1879 as Florence Lois Weber, she had a nice upbringing, especially once her parents believed that she was a piano prodigy. She ditched her piano playing for 2 years to join Church Army Workers, a sort of evangelical Salvation Army. And with that, she went to cities like Pittsburgh and New York to save poor, unfortunate souls. She certainly believed in the mission, but I also think joining a Bobo version of the Salvation Army was one of the few ways you can get a taste of freedom as a turn-of-the-century girl. It was sort of like a 1890s version of a gap year. When the Church Army Workers disbanded in 1900, the 21-year-old Weber returned home and returned to music. She toured the country as a concert pianist until 1904, when she gave her final performance in Charleston, South Carolina. There, the story goes, a piano key broke while she was playing a riveting rendition of Hungarian Rhapsody No. 8. She kept reaching for the broken key, feeling the pain of embarrassment each time that she did. She said, "The incident broke my nerve," and she never performed concerts again. But Weber did not give up on the arts. She did what most of us do when something breaks: turn to theater. What, just me? I broke my hip doing martial arts when I was 13, so I auditioned for the school play and never looked back. Thank you, injury that still acts up when it rains. Acting in New York started off rough. She claimed that a bite of food rarely passed her lips, a poetic quote that I hate to love, and that her hair was falling out from stress. She wanted to return home, but her father reminded her of her beloved Church Army days and convinced her that she can try to save souls in the theater. And whose souls need more saving than chorus girls? Thus, Lois Weber was armed with a mission from God to infiltrate the theater. She got work as a chorus girl, in a move that I hope made her feel like a theatrical spy, and she was praised for her musical abilities. It's there that she met her future husband, an actor and touring manager, Wendell Phillips Smalley. Yes, he was the grandson of writer Oliver Wendell Holmes. Thank you for asking. He was 38 when he married the 25-year-old Lois in 1904, after having known her for just 1 month. It's like they say, when you know, you know. Or, when you see a meal ticket out of a chorus girl life, you go. She quit acting to spend her days as a housewife, but housewifing was a little boring for Weber, so she spent her free time writing scenes for fun. That wound up being a very smart hobby, because her big break in the movie industry was just around the corner. Writing scenarios gave her the acting bug all over again, so she took to the papers to see if she could find acting gigs outside of her hubby's theatrical troupe. I don't think it was a mission from God this time. I think she was just bored out of her mind. Just to set the stage, this was the early 1900s, and a couple of film studios had just set up shop in New Jersey. Most importantly, a little French production company had just opened an American outpost. Remember Alice Guy Blaché from the first episode? She was the first female filmmaker. Well, She hired Lois Weber in 1908 for her very first film gig with the Gaumont production company. Both Alice and her husband Herbert claim to have given Lois her first job in the movies, which still happens when someone gets famous. Every other person gave them their big break. Sure you did. According to some accounts, Lois Weber was hired by Alice to sing songs for the Chronophone soundtrack that accompanied films. Women helping women, we love to see it. However, other accounts give credit to Alice's husband Herbert, who hired Weber for a small acting job, and quickly learned that Weber actually had a very keen eye for film. Allegedly, it only took days for Herbert to hire Lois Weber to direct her own short films for their production company. So, it's unclear which account is the definitive truth, but one thing is for certain. Alice Guy Blachet's production company gave Lois Weber her first break in the film industry. Pretty cool if you ask me. Like a lot of women in these early Hollywood stories, Lois Weber soon inspired her own husband, Smalley, to become involved. These husbands, I tell ya, they see dollar signs and they want in too. So the two of them began devising film ideas together. The couple is credited with several scripts as a pair, while Weber began directing them herself for a short-lived studio called Rex Motion Picture Company. Between 1911 and 1914, Weber directed one 10-minute movie a week for Rex. That is so much work, even by today's standards. But Lois Weber didn't care. She loved it. She felt alive in the film industry. In a March 1914 edition of the magazine Sunset, Weber told her interviewer, "In moving pictures, I have found my life's work. I can preach to my heart's content, and with the opportunity to write the play, act the leading role, and direct the entire production myself, if my message fails to reach someone, I can only blame myself." In 1912, Rex was bought out by a little studio run by Carl Laemmle, known as Universal. Yeah, it's the same Universal. Weber and Smalley moved out west to Hollywood, where they were greeted by their contemporaries like D.W. Griffith and Cecil B. DeMille, names you may have heard before. She and her husband moved to run the Western division of Rex Studios, a subsidiary of Universal, but they wanted more creative control. Before long, the two of them started their own production company, Bosworth Studios. Now Weber had what she wanted, full creative control. So while DeMille and Griffith were making huge historical epics with enormous sets and lavish costumes, Weber focused on interiority. She looked at the experiences of women small and large. She focused on difficult themes such as urban life, capital punishment, the inequality of the sexes, and even sex itself. She told a 1917 photoplay reporter that film is the new novel. She said that she wanted her films to get under the skin in the way that some novels did. I love that because I used to walk around in undergrad saying TV is the new novel. So yeah, I'm basically the Lois Weber of annoying people. Her films were controversial and incredibly popular. Tale as old as time, am I right? Her films stood out for that reason. But she was also developing cutting-edge techniques that have become the bedrock of filmmaking, specifically the split screen. Weber is credited with pioneering the use of split-screen technology, which is when you see simultaneous action on your screen from 2 or 3 different scenes or locations. We first saw her use this in the 1913 film Suspense. In Suspense, a man tries to break into a woman's home. We see him outside of the door, and then the screen splits into 3 to show us the woman calling her husband for help and her husband racing home to save the day. This experimentation in early action-packed storytelling shows off Weber's amazing sense of timing and, well, suspense. Suspense wasn't controversial, it was just a really cool movie. But remember when I said she pissed off the censors? It's around this time that she starts dialing up the controversy. In 1915, she released her film Hypocrites. 1915 is an important year for Hollywood because it's the same year that Birth of a Nation was released. Yeah, that old racist gem. And folks, it really is so racist. Like, even for its time, it was racist. People actually protested it at its time. So don't let anyone tell you that that's just the way it was. Nah, the way it was racist. But it's still taught in film history classes because of how innovative the filmmaking was. And as we just said, Weber was also doing cutting-edge technology at the time. So maybe Weber's hypocrites should be studied in film schools instead or in addition to, I don't know, just a suggestion. The Hypocrites uses split-screen, dream sequence visuals, and a very impressive tracking shot with a sleek opening credit sequence. You can find the film on YouTube. It runs just under an hour, but be warned, there is nudity. Historic nudity. The film follows parallel narratives, one about a monk who outrages the people in his village when he unveils a statue of a nude woman he calls Truth. The other is about a minister struggling with his congregation's hypocritical ways. He's about to give up hope when a vision appears to him in the form of what else? A naked woman. She is the depiction of truth, literally naked truth, and she leads him on a journey to show the importance of truth. Actress Margaret Edwards plays Naked Truth, and she was cast after winning a contest for the most beautiful figure in the world. Well, with a title like that, I guess you just gotta show it off. Now, some scholars cite this as the first non-porno nude scene in Hollywood. But Audrey Munson would like to have a word. You see, the distinction for the first full-frontal female nude scene in a Hollywood film is debated between those two actresses. So let's go a quick Audrey Munson side quest, because this shit is fascinating and I love me a side quest. So come aboard for a little on-screen nudity lesson. Yippee! If you've been to New York City at all, then you have seen Audrey Munson's naked body, like, a lot. She was the go-to model in the 19-teens, and she posed for several statues. Her body can be seen above courthouses, gates, in cemeteries, at the Met, outside and inside the Brooklyn Museum, the Spirit of Commerce at the Manhattan Bridge, the Helen Hayes Theater, Grand Army Plaza, and so many places, including several state capitol buildings. So the chances are very, very high that you've seen Audrey Munson's naked body at some point. She also went nude in the 1915 film Inspiration, where she played, what else? A nude model. Censors were upset about the scene, but they hesitated to ban it because they feared that banning the film would lead to a ban on Renaissance art. Oh, I should mention, I was a writer for Mr. Skin for several years, so knowing about nude scenes is kind of my jam. If you don't know about Mr. Skin, it's a website that tells you where, in TV shows and movies, people are naked. So you don't have to do all that dirty work. It's like a sexy IMDb, and this is not a bit, this is a real job I had for a long time. Great benefits. So you see, I'm not a weird pervert. I'm a professional. Anyway, Munson's story gets really crazy from there. I'm talking like true crime crazy, with a murder mystery that will make you wonder why this isn't a movie yet. But Audrey Munson wasn't one of Lois Weber's actresses. She's just another very important person in history whose name is forgotten, despite the fact that her image lives on. So, the first nude models in film were Munson and Margaret Edwards. And Margaret Edwards' nude scene was so controversial that it nearly caused a riot. Audiences were warned about the film's vulgar scenes, and they came anyway. In fact, they probably flocked to the theater for that very reason. Ironically, preachers decried the film, which is about a preacher doing his best. The mayor of Boston even suggested that the distributor paint clothing on the figure, as if she were a moving paper doll. Honestly, that's kind of cute. I'd watch that. Universal executive Carl Laemmle took notice of Lois Weber's controversy and success. He made her an offer, $5,000 a week. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $150,000. Weber was making the big bucks. In Photoplay's 1916 listing of Hollywood's top directors, she and Smalley were listed first, above Griffith. Now make no mistake, Smalley was not directing these films, but he was credited as her advisor, and he likely did do a great amount of producing. But Lois Weber was always the director. Her 1916 film Where Are My Children tackled birth control and abortion openly. This was 1916. Over 100 years later, those are still sticky topics. But back in 1916, printing literature about birth control was still illegal under the Comstock Act. Here, Weber was able to circumnavigate that law by putting endorsement of birth control on film. And I do want to mention, that there were other female directors working in Hollywood at this time. Most of them began their short careers around 1915. These were women like Cleo Madison, Marion Wong, Ruth Ann Baldwin, Mabel Normand, and Nell Shipman, who all wore many hats just like Weber. Helen Gardner was actually the very first American woman to run a production company all the way back in 1912. And her production company focused on feature films, super unusual for the time. So yeah, there were women making movies, but times were about to change. And a lot of those same women I just mentioned were shut out of directing by the mid-20s. We'll get to why in just a moment. From 1916 to 1921, Weber was the highest paid and best respected female director in Hollywood. She took her riches and opened her own company, Lois Weber Productions, at 4634 Santa Monica Boulevard in 1917. Now she and Smalley had full creative control. Her power and popularity continued to rise, so much so that she signed one of Hollywood's most lucrative distribution deals in 1920. Her deal with famous players Lasky was for $50,000 a film plus half the profits. That is an unheard of amount of money. That is just over $1 million today. She was at the top of her game and confident that her next film was going to rock audiences around the world. Unfortunately, society had changed, and that was not what happened. Because as we're about to find out, that's not what men wanted. The lease on her production studio was only 3 years long. It's speculated that Lois Weber Productions couldn't fork up the money for a new lease after Paramount declined to release her 1921 film, What Do Men Want? You see, executives at Paramount got their panties in a bunch over this film because it was explicitly about power imbalances between the sexes. The wealthy, all-male executives didn't like being told they had too much power, especially in 1921. Quick history lesson here. White women had just earned the right to vote. The 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, so men were getting a little fussy about women having too much of a say in how they ran things. By 1921, men wanted to hold on to their power rather than make room at the table. Women had just earned the right to vote. What more could they possibly want? So this feminist backlash, it's kind of a tale as old as time. Look no further than the hashtag #MeToo movement or even the amazing social activism in the summer of 2020, and then look at, where we are now. If you're listening to this in the future, I'm recording this in the year of our Dark Lord 2025. Now back to the 1920s. The Paramount decision was just that kind of vibe 100 years ago, which is why you also see the same few rising female directors and producers I just mentioned get shunned to the sidelines at the same time, relegated to other industry jobs where men wouldn't feel bossed around by women on set. Thank God that's changed. With Paramount's refusal to release this new film, Weber's production company experienced a serious financial blow. To make matters worse, her marriage was going through a rough patch. Smalley had been having affairs with some of their actresses. Damn, et tu, Smalley? Your girl became successful and you go behind her back? For shame. Weber knew about his dalliances, but she was determined to keep their marriage intact. So she and her husband left Hollywood for a long jaunt to Europe. And when they returned in 1923, they divorced. They had been married for 17 years. Weber's output declined after that, leading some to speculate that her husband did a lot more producing than Weber could handle on her own. And that's completely possible. But it could also be that she just lost her studio and financial resources. Films are expensive, y'all. Plus, the woman just went through a divorce at a time where being a divorcee was a little more difficult. Divorce sucks now, but imagine how much it sucked in 1923. So it sounds to me like losing her production partner and life partner was a double whammy that would debilitate most people. But that's not all. 1920 society was different. We already talked about the feminist backlash, but Weber's work was also seen as overly saccharine and didactic. And post-war audiences in the 20s were gearing up for the Jazz Age. They didn't want sermons and moral lessons. They wanted escapism and whimsy. They wanted fun-loving rich people drinking champagne and dancing their troubles away. As a critic in The Screen wrote in 1921, Why does Miss Weber dedicate herself, her time, and her equipment to the construction of simple sermons? Ouch. Audiences were like, stop trying to teach me shit, we just want to party. Moral lessons were out, debauchery was in. Sorry, girl. And without her studio, she was no longer the one in control. Lois Weber could only work as a director for hire, so she had to do what she liked least, concede her vision to a bunch of producers, directors, and even actors who wanted to tell Weber what she could and could not do. She wanted films with strong messages, and she wanted to make them her way. With censorship issues growing and talkies on the rise, she just couldn't keep up. That, or she didn't want to. Despite experimenting with sound in her early short films, she only directed one talkie, 1934's White Heat, which was an interracial romance set in Hawaii between a white sugar plantation owner and a native Hawaiian. White Heat has been lost to time, but it's worth noting that Hollywood's censorship codes crystallized in 1934, and I would love to see what she was able to get past the censors in that movie. But alas, it was her last movie. She remarried and redivorced. She managed a few apartment buildings in LA to make ends meet. But Weber's fortune diminished, and she passed away at the age of 60 from an ulcer in 1939 in relative poverty. Smalley died earlier that same year at the age of 73. Her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame is only a few blocks away from where her studio once sat. There is no trace of it anymore. After her death, Weber was mostly remembered for her keen eye at identifying talented young actresses. She was sort of rediscovered by the new wave of American film critics and scholars in the 70s who sought to put some long overdue respect on Weber's name. That time period makes a lot of sense for her rediscovery. As we'll talk about here and there, the American independence changed Hollywood in the 60s and 70s, and the auteur theory became a fascination with young filmmakers and critics. Thus, filmmakers who wrote, directed, edited, or even starred in their own films were celebrated much like they are today, as the Jacks and Jills of the trade are the norm. Seriously, look at any film festival lineup. Almost everything is written, directed, and produced by the same person. Well, Lois Weber was the one doing it first, operating like an auteur at a time when the medium of film was still figuring itself out. As she said, everybody was so busy learning their particular branch of a new industry that no one had time to notice whether or not a woman was gaining a foothold. I'm glad it took them so long to notice or care, so that Lois Weber had the opportunity to make 100 short films and 40 features. While most are lost to time, we'll do our best to keep her legacy alive. Special thanks goes to the Los Angeles Public Library for letting me research and record. Thank you to Brock Alter for audio engineering for me today. This podcast is a part of Grab Bag Collab. Please check out the other amazing pods on this super cool network. And join me next week as we travel way forward in time to the 1970s. I was tempted to keep this linear, but I think it's going to be fun to jump around a bit. Next week, we'll talk about women working behind the scenes in the sexploitation genre. What can I say? I was inspired by Margaret Edwards and the Hypocrites. In the meantime, let's go to the movies. Bye.